Welcome to this EstimatorXpress Getting Started video. In this section, we'll be estimating a structural opening. Start by opening the Structural Opening Workbook. Click on the Structural Opening Workbook and click the Open Workbook button. In the Structural Opening Workbook, there are 3 worksheets set up for different sizes of opening. For this example, I'm going to use the Small Opening worksheet. Set the number of identical openings for this worksheet to 1. This means there is one opening of this size. If you had multiple openings, you could enter the number of openings here to estimate them all in one go without entering any additional information. Once you've typed in the number of identical openings, click the Small Opening worksheet on the left-hand side of the screen. You'll find yourself looking at the Dimensions tab, where a column has been added with the dimensions already set up. This will speed up the estimating process. By making a few changes to these template dimensions, you can quickly cost up the structural opening. You can change the dimensions by typing directly into the column, or you can launch the Dimensions wizard by clicking the Dims wizard button. I'm going to launch the Dimensions wizard. Work your way through the dimensions in the Dimensions wizard and change them as necessary. The first page deals with the details of the opening. The thickness of the wall opening is going to be 0.3 meters in my extension example. I'm going to change the width of the opening to 2.7 meters, but the opening height of 2.1 meters is fine. There's a 150mm bearing at the end of the steel, so I'm going to leave that as it is. Looking at the options to the right, there's an option to include pad stones. You can also set the number of bricks at each end and the number of slates to pack out the pad stones. You'll probably want pad stones, so leave that set to Y or Yes. Then enter the number of bricks and the number of slates. The bulking factor for the spoil is used to calculate how much skip space is required. It's set to 2 because the bricks and blocks will take up roughly twice as much space when they're removed from the wall and thrown into a skip. As we're forming the opening, we also need to enter the wall thickness, so I'm going to set that to 0.3 meters. Once you're happy with these settings, click Next. The next page deals with the plastering to the reveals. There's a note here saying that the plastering to the face of the walls needs to be estimated using a plastering workbook. You could use the Complete Room Plastering Workbook, the Plaster Patching Workbook if you just need to plaster around the edge of the opening, or perhaps the Internal Renovation Workbook if you're renovating the internal side of the existing wall. If we switch on the tech tips and the tech labels, you'll see that there are dimension boxes for the spacing of the noggins and for the length of the noggins. Tell EstimatorXpress if you're going to be plastering the reveal, the number of angle beads required, and whether the reveals will be painted. I'm happy to leave these all set to the default options, but change them as you need to. Once you've set all of the options, click Finish. We can now see which resources have been specified using the Calculated Resources and the Sundry Resources tabs. First, click the Calculated Resources tab. Remember, the Calculated Resources tab contains the materials, labour and plant which have been calculated based on the dimensions of the structural opening. If we look at the lintels, you'll see that RSJs have been specified. If you click on a lintel and click Change Resource, you can scroll down the price book and select an alternative steel. For example, you could use a universal beam if something more heavy duty is required. I'm going to click Cancel for now. Further down the tab, we can see the bricks, the pad stones and the slates which have been specified. We can also see the plastering details. At the bottom we can see the labour and the skip which has been allowed for to remove the spoil from site. Now click on the Sundry Resources tab. The forming of the opening and the fixing of the lintel are estimated here, as they're not necessarily dependent on the dimensions you've entered. The quantity per item for each resource has already been pre-filled with an appropriate figure, in this case allowing 6 hours for the bricklayer to form the opening. If we'd opened the worksheet for the large size opening, more time would have been allowed. There may be situations where you need to change this figure. Say for example you were forming the opening in a stone wall, that could take much longer, so you'd want to increase the number of hours to form the opening for the bricklayer and the bricklayer's mate. And the same goes for fixing the lintels. You can tweak these figures as required. Underneath the labour, we can see the plant for forming the opening. we've got strong buoys specified here. There's plant for propping the structural opening, so we've got acro props. And we've also got a wheelbarrow, disc cutter and a shovel. You can tweak the amount of time that each tool or plant item is required for by changing the quantity per item column. Just make sure to check the unit before you do this. Once you're happy with the sundry resources, click Close Workbook to return to the job summary. Click Yes or No to indicate whether the workbook is complete. Remember, if you set the workbook to completed, you can still go back in and make changes to it. The completed marker is just there to help you keep track of where you're up to. So that's the structural opening estimated. Thank you for watching this EstimatorXpress video on estimating structural openings.